I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Chris Stevens.
Well, good evening, Madam Deputy Speaker. Exactly 10 years have passed since, in April 2014, an all-party parliamentary inquiry was launched to investigate hunger and food poverty in these islands, led by the great Frank Field, now Lord Field of Birkenhead, who at that time was a distinguished member of this House. The inquiry's report contained a powerful rallying cry. It said, "The simple but devastating fact that hunger stalks this country should confront each of the main political parties with the most basic and fundamental political challenge. With rising national income, nobody could have predicted that in 2014 there would be a significant number of hungry people in Britain, but there are." Madam Deputy Speaker, in identifying the forces behind that hunger, the inquiry noted something fundamental is happening in advanced Western economies which throws into doubt the effectiveness of a national minimum below which no one is allowed to fall. It is the erosion of an effective national minimum that has led to the existence of hunger and the rise of the food bank movement in its wake. The fact that I'll be outlining some of those same specific forces later in this debate, as well as the fact that the numbers of people having to use food banks has increased relentlessly since the inquiry published its report, is a shocking indictment of the UK Government's response to hunger and food poverty over these past 10 years. It is also a reminder of why an effective strategy is now so necessary, so as to prevent yet another full decade of lengthening queues for food banks and rising levels of hunger. The Government's Family Resources Survey recently found that between 2019-20 and 22-23, household food insecurity increased for the UK as a whole from 8% to 10%. Moreover, we know that larger families with children are particularly vulnerable to this form of injustice. A survey commissioned last year by Feeding Britain found that while 3% of households with no children reported accessing a food bank, this proportion increased to 6% among those with one child and 7% among those with two children. The highest proportion, 13%, was to be found amongst those with 3 or more children. In a similar vein, adults living in a household with 3 or more children were almost 4 times as likely to report skipping meals every day because there was not enough money for food than those with one child, and almost 6 times as likely to do so than those with no children. As the Minister will know, that this injustice is felt by people both in and out of paid employment. Among members surveyed by the Bakers Union, the number of people relying on food banks increased between 2021 and 2023 from 7% to 17%. Those relying on friends and family have gone from 20% to 34%, and those eating less have gone from 35% to 57%. 80% of those surveyed are eating cheaper, that is, unhealthier meals. 55% have been worried about running out of food, and 45% skipped meals. Even closer to home, the Minister may also be aware of the fact that food bank usage among staff at the Department of Work and Pensions increased from 8% of those surveyed by the PCS Union in 2022 to 11% in 2023. And perhaps the Minister can explain why we have so many staff who work for the Department of Work and Pensions who are only paid the national minimum wage. The Food Foundation, in its recent survey, showed that in January 2024, this year, 15% of UK households were experiencing food insecurity. Among households with children, 20% were experiencing food insecurity. That 24% of households of non-white ethnicity were food insecure, and that's 1.6 times more than households of white ethnicity. 15% of those are in some kind of employment where they are food insecure. And the stark health inequalities are highly prevalent, particularly when it comes to diet-related poor health. The most deprived communities are affected disproportionately by much higher rates of food-related ill health and disease, from obesity to type 2 diabetes to cardiovascular disease to dental decay. Recent reports show an increase in hospital admissions for nutrient deficiencies, and this data should ring alarm bells. The longevity of the cost of living crisis now means food insecurity has become the norm for many households who are unable to buy staple nutritious products. Anyone who volunteers for a food bank in Glasgow will tell you, Madam Deputy Speaker, like any other asylum dispersal area, they need to assist those who seek sanctuary in the UK, with the asylum seekers receiving a payment of £45 a week, a payment equivalent to what a youth trainee was receiving 30 years ago. So how should the government respond to these alarming figures? Well, fortunately, there are two recent precedents from the Biden administration in America and the Scottish Government under Humza Yousaf, both of whom have published strategies to eliminate hunger and food poverty within the coming years. A consistent thread running through both of these strategies is a combination of specific policies to raise household income levels, improve access to nutritional support schemes, and accelerate the development of innovative projects which bring affordable food to areas where people are struggling most. And it is that threefold combination that I would like to propose to the Minister by way of an effective food poverty strategy that can eliminate the need for food banks in these islands by 2030. First, the 2014 inquiry identified food bank usage as resulting from delays and errors in the processing and payment of benefits, the sometimes heavy-handed issuing of benefit sanctions, a sudden loss of earnings through reduced hours or unemployment, the absence of free school meals, the accumulation of problem debt, or for some even a lost purse. They added that a further group of factors similarly exposes the vulnerability of many poor families. The poor are penalised for their poverty with a raft of disproportionate charges for basic utilities. They pay more for their energy through prepayment meters and are more likely to be charged to withdraw cash from their local machine, and often are unable to take advantage of the best mobile phone contracts, meaning they're likely to be just one bill away from needing to use a food bank. And today, around half of all households in receipts of universal credit are having, on average, £60 a month deducted from their income, much of which is to repay the loans needed to cover the 5-week delay at the beginning of a new claim. In the Glasgow South West constituency, Madam Deputy Speaker, almost £250,000 per month was being deducted last year. I would at this stage have been provided similar figures around the impacts of the government's sanctions policy in Glasgow South West, but the government decided last year that figures would no longer be made available to members of this House on the amount of money being sanctioned in the constituencies that we all represent. But thanks to Dr David Webster at the University of Glasgow, we know that a total of 538,842 universal credit sanctions were imposed in the year to end October 2023, and that 419,219 individual universal credit claimants received at least one sanction. Food banks across these islands have identified these two policies as being the two big recruiting sergeants for emergency food aid. So a first plank of a food poverty strategy must be to reform or get rid of these deductions and sanctions which are applied so harshly as to leave people hungry. In a similar category, I would place the abolition of the two-child limit on social security payments, as well as the introduction of a formal mechanism for advising the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions on the benefit levels that are required each year to safeguard all households from hunger and food poverty, and the payment of fair wages throughout the public sector and the economy as a whole, so that a fair day's work genuinely delivers a fair day's pay to all. We need to end the scandal of those working in hospitality not being able to buy food for themselves. We need to end insecure work and guarantee workers their hours of work. We also need firm action against the poverty premium, which still results in poorer households missing out on the best and fairest deals for essential living costs. Second, Madam Deputy Speaker, there are different programmes available specifically to make nutritious food available to people at risk of food poverty. But awareness and take-up of these programmes has never been as high as it could have been. So can the Minister tell me if the Government will undertake to work with all devolved administrations and local authorities to ensure that they have the tools they need automatically to identify and register all eligible households for these programmes? Because again, that is something that featured heavily in the Biden strategy and could extend much needed help to hundreds of thousands of children across these islands. Third, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am proud to have set up the Good Food Scotland programme, which across Glasgow now runs 7 affordable food larders and community shops, including those in Nitshill, Cardonald and Linthouse in my constituency, serving 2,000 members with fresh, nutritious food at a low cost and helping to fill the gap between big supermarkets and food banks. This approach protects those members from food poverty with dignity and choice, and we expect to be running 10 across the city of Glasgow by the end of this year. I'll give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I think he's making an excellent contribution on the importance of and need for a food strategy. But in highlighting the volunteers and groups across Glasgow that he works with, I wonder if he would join with me in celebrating the volunteers in Midlothian who helped to run the Mayfield and East Houses Development Trust Pantry, the Woodburn Pantry, the Gorbridge Beacon Pantry, the Newton Grange Development Trust Pantry, the Rosewell Stendegg Community Fridge, and the Food Friends Pantry and Community Fridge, who I recently visited, along with the Midlothian Food Bank at Gorbridge Parish Church and various pantries run by Serenians across Midlothian, who all make such an amazing contribution.
Well, I'm glad to join my honourable friend with thanking his organisations in Midlothian, and he will know, as I do, the case studies from these organisations are very illuminating. And I'm going to give one now, Madam Deputy Speaker, because case studies from these projects show how much of a difference they can actually make. A couple using the Linthouse larder used to do their weekly shop in Asda at a cost of £80 a week. Buying the same items in the Linthouse larder has reduced their weekly shop to £30 a week. That's a saving of £50 a week, and that does help many people in Glasgow South West. And as my honourable friend for Midlothian says, with his organisations, those are the sort of savings that can be made. And I want to thank all the community organisations in Glasgow South West and beyond across these islands who are tackling hunger and food poverty. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, on a bigger scale and with the appropriate resources, these affordable food programmes could play an important part in eliminating food poverty across these islands. So I would propose to the Minister that the Government commits as soon as possible to a cross-sector summit with the aim of helping communities secure the resources that they need to deliver such programmes at the scale that will be necessary in the years ahead. In addition to that, much of the food required to sustain such programmes could be made available if the Government had introduced the mandatory reporting of food waste and surplus in retailers' supply chains, a measure which would trigger much-needed action by those retailers to ensure edible surplus arising the farms and factories that supply them is in fact recycled for human consumption rather than put to waste. When Baroness Boycott proposed such a measure in the other place in 2021, the Government rejected the idea on the proviso that voluntary efforts within the food industry should first be given a chance. I would argue, Madam Deputy Speaker, 3 years on, it is surely time to reconsider the idea with urgency. In drawing to a close, and good morning, Madam Deputy Speaker, in drawing to a close, it's nothing short of shameful to be having to bring the issue of hunger yet again to this House as a form of injustice that continues to blight the lives of millions of people in the UK, and exactly a decade after the launch of an all-party inquiry which gave the Government a set of proposals to make it a thing of the past. Just imagine a society where no one goes hungry. Just imagine a society with a proper social security system. Just imagine a society where work pays. And just imagine a society where food is accessible for all and at a fair price. That should be our rallying call. We cannot afford to let even more time slip by without a strategy to achieve that objective. And with the numbers of hungry people continue to rise, now more than ever, we need to tackle this emergency. And I await with interest the Minister's response.
Minister Joe Church.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, and good morning from me as well. I congratulate the Honourable Member for Glasgow South West on securing this important debate on the potential merits of a food poverty strategy. I'd like to start by saying no one wants to see people struggling in our constituencies right across these islands, and I understand fully the passion that drives the contribution on this important subject. I would like to add my voice to those of the Honourable Gentleman and the Honourable Gentleman for Midlothian in extending thanks to all those charities and more broadly institutions like the church that do lunches and so on, that not only provide food but also provide part of that cohesive societal network that helps people at times of need. Food insecurity is highly complex, and actually your contribution explained very clearly how complex it is, because you covered departments. Oh, I apologise. The Honourable Gentleman showed how complex it is and how it covered departments, not only my own, but also DEFRA, health, business, HMT, and so on. Now, the annual statistics on incomes and living standards published by the department last month covered the year when the war in Ukraine and the global supply pressures led to exceedingly high inflation, averaging 10% over the year. And the CPI food price inflation peaked, reaching a high of 19.1 in March 23. But thankfully, latest figures show that it has dropped again to some 4%, with upward forces showing that the rise in February and March was 0.2, down from 1.1 on a similar position last year. Now, food bank use statistically across this period has remained relatively stable, although I would agree that it is higher than any of us would want to see. Now, since 22-23, the period covered by the statistics, we've taken firm action to help families on the lowest income, spending around $306 billion this coming financial year through the welfare system, including $138 billion on families and those of working age. The government has provided an unprecedented cost of living support package worth $96 billion over the 22-3 and 23-4 periods, including $20 billion for 2 rounds of cost of living payments targeted specifically at those people who are struggling the most. Importantly, this helped shield people from the impact of inflation and prevented some 1.3 million households dropping into absolute poverty after housing costs. Now, since 2010, the government has overseen significant falls in poverty, with 1.1 million fewer people in absolute low income after housing costs in 22-3 compared to 9-10. But I'm not suggesting for a minute that things have not and do not remain still difficult for many. Food poverty, as I said, is complex and isn't something that can be tackled through welfare alone. The levers for this issue sit with a number of government departments, and that's why we're working across government to not only bring down food inflation, but meeting regularly with external anti-poverty stakeholders through our departments and talking across departments for what more we can do, including encouraging retailers and local ecosystems as well. Through regular engagement, the Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs continues to work with food businesses through the supply chain to explore a range of measures they can take to ensure the availability of affordable food, including maintaining value ranges, price matching and price freezing. However, you would expect me to argue that it isn't for government to tell retail outlets how to set their food prices, nor to tell companies what to do. Retailers have introduced incentives for customers, such as reward cards offering small discounts, and a number of stores are offering meal deals, either within store or within their cafes. Many use local or national groups to redistribute food, a point that he well made at the end of a working day, and many organisations interface with FareShare, for example, amongst others. Of course,
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. It is not the silver bullet, but one of the things that could help is that we have a scandalous amount of food that's being wasted that goes to landfill, and I think that we really need to do something about that. So can she urge her colleagues in DEFRA to sit down with us who care passionately about this subject to make sure that we have food poverty on one hand and a large amount of food waste on the other, and I think that that's something that we need to address.
Thank the honourable gentleman, and funnily enough, I was talking to the DEFRA Minister about that exact point earlier today, and because he mentioned that they weren't mandated 3 years ago, and I was discussing how the reporting of it and so on is going, because we know that not only is there the benefits to the redistribution for individuals, there is also quite a significant positive environmental benefit for not putting that food to landfill and the creation of methane. So it arguably is a double win. I also think that actually that redistribution done sensibly enables others to do what by charities like the Felix charity making freezer foods and so on for people helps enable them to feed others. Now, the economy has turned a corner, inflation has more than halved and is forecast to fall below 2% in 24-5, whilst wages are rising in real terms and have done for the last consecutive 9 months in a row. Prices for food and non-alcoholic beverages rose by 4% in the year to March, easing for the 12th consecutive month. However, we recognise the financial challenges that many are still facing, which is why as inflation comes down to the 2% target, we are continuing to provide support for the 24-5 period. This includes uprating working age benefits by 6.7%, well ahead of the inflation rate that is now running, and uplifting the local housing allowance to the 30th percentile of local rents, which will benefit about 1.6 million private renters by an average of about £800 a year. As he indicated, alleviating financial pressures throughout the system for individuals. Further, the additional support for families such as free school meals, which are being claimed by some 2 million of the most disadvantaged pupils, the 40 million that the Department of Education has put into stimulating the breakfast clubs. Healthy food schemes such as Healthy Start, which provide a nutritional safety net to more than 3 million children. With Healthy Start, it was a policy that I looked after when I was at Health, getting that uplift to £4.25 a week so that pregnant women and children over 1 and under 4 receive £4.25 every week. For a child under 1, it's £8.50 every week. It can be used to buy or put towards the cost of fresh, frozen or tinned fruit, vegetables, fresh dried tinned pulses, milk and infant formula. Now, I remember well meeting Daisy, who spoke to me very clearly about the difference, as you mentioned, having those fresh products come into her life and into her children's life, and what nutritional benefit that gave them. And for those who still need extra help while inflation continues to fall, we're providing an additional £500 million to enable the extension of the Household Support Fund for a further 6 months, including funding for the devolved administrations through the Barnett formula, meaning local authorities in England receive an additional £421 million for local people, and then the other being distributed to the other nations. The fantastic work, as we mentioned, of independent charitable organisations also helps in this space, whether they are our local churches and organisations providing lunches, community pantry schemes, as both you and the Honourable Member mentioned. They all help individuals and families at a point of need, of course.
the Minister again for being extremely generous. One of the concerns that's been reported to us is that the Department of Work and Pensions is no longer helping with food bank vouchers. Can you confirm that that's now departmental policy? Because that would be a very real concern for someone who is in difficulty, having a conversation with a work coach, for example, who's now been denied that food bank voucher or discussing that sort of support that someone in absolute poverty requires.
So I thank the honourable member, and I'd like to thank him for the opportunity to be able to put to bed completely that there has been any change in our policy. We have always signposted. The only thing DWP have done is brought in a new slip to replace the one used previously. And this is no change to our existing policy, but allows us to improve our existing practices to comply with our departmental responsibilities under GDPR. Our job centres continue to provide customers with guidance to find that additional support, including signposting to emergency food support where appropriate. So I would thank him, because no, we don't. We stand there ready to help people when they are most in need. The honourable member for Glasgow South West mentioned the two-child policy. The latest statistic we have for households in receipt of universal credit is the majority of families, some 78%, had fewer than 3 children. Surely it's right that all families, those in receipt of universal credit or not, should face the same financial choices when deciding to grow their family. While our actions have shown that we remain committed to a strong welfare safety net, particularly during challenging economic times, we know the best way we can help is through support to move into work. This approach is based on clear evidence on the role of work where it's full-time, substantially reducing poverty. Latest statistics show that working-age adults in workless households were about 7 times more likely to be in absolute poverty after housing costs. Children living in workless households were over 6 times more likely to be in absolute poverty after housing costs than those families where adults work. There are now over 1 million fewer workless households in the UK than in 2010, and that's 6,800 fewer children growing up in a home where no one works. And that is a cause, in my view, for some gratitude. It's why there's over 900,000 vacancies across the UK, and we're firmly supporting people through our core job centre offer to get into work. We support them with travel costs, flexible support fund, through the flexible support fund, face-to-face time with work coaches, help with interviews. We support people in the voluntary into in-work progression in all job centres across Britain, providing an estimated 1.6 low-paid workers on UC access to personalised work coaches. We also reduce the taper rate from 63 to 55 pence in the pound. We provide childcare costs capped at £1,000 for a single child and over £1,700 a month for larger families. And we can even help with the advance. To ensure work pays, we've put the national living wage for people aged 21 up by over 9.8% to £11.44, something he mentioned, making sure that people are rewarded for the work they do. This means an extra £1,800 for someone working full-time. We're also providing a tax cut for 27 million people by further reducing the main Class 1 national insurance contribution. Our focus continues to be on providing opportunities for people to be supported and succeed in work, based on our firm belief that this is the sustainable way of tackling all forms of poverty. But at the same time, we understand the challenges people face and will continue to work across government and party to ensure food security and the broader welfare system will support those who need it.
Order. I wish to inform the House that the message to the Commons from the Lords is that the Lords do not insist on their amendment to the Safety of Rwanda Asylum and Immigration Bill, to which the Commons have disagreed. The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The ayes have it. Order. Order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.